Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a really fascinating and honestly deeply complex geopolitical narrative based on a recent NTV News analysis. Now, real quick before we jump in, just a heads up that this report deals with some highly charged political claims. I'm absolutely not here to take sides or endorse any specific viewpoints. My goal is just to impartially break down the source material for you, okay? So, we are looking at a massive contradiction playing out right now in South Asia. On one hand, you have these deeply entrenched political narratives, stories basically spun for domestic audiences. But then, on the exact opposite side, you have cold, hard economic data telling a completely different story. It is a classic tale of political propaganda totally clashing with reality, specifically focusing on the shifting dynamics between India and Bangladesh. We're going to really dig into the numbers, the political strategies, and these massive structural shifts that are basically reshaping the entire region.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. Number 1, narratives versus economic data. Number 2, election strategy and propaganda. 3, the Kolkata EVM fire. 4, economy under new leadership. 5, the twin geopolitical challenges. And finally, number 6, wealth requires military security.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, narratives versus economic data, contradictions in South Asia. So the NTV report details how for literally decades, there's been a very deliberate political propaganda campaign coming out of New Delhi. Using pretty derogatory terms like Kingaloo, this narrative essentially labeled Bangladeshis as poor infiltrators, desperate to cross the border. But the report aggressively contrasts this against reality, because Bangladesh is quietly out there breaking economic records. The political script says starving neighbor, but the actual data? The data says they are hitting a staggering $3,000 GDP per capita. It's a total mismatch.
Now, real quick, let's just make sure we're on the same page about what we're actually measuring here. Per capita GDP is basically a country's total annual income divided equally among its population. Why is this absolutely crucial? Well, because it acts as the primary indicator of actual purchasing power and the standard of living for the average citizen. It is the metric that cuts through all the political noise. It tells us how much money is genuinely in the pockets of the people, which lets us accurately compare the real economic shift happening between these two neighboring nations.
And the IMF projections from the World Economic Outlook brilliantly illustrate this shift. By 2026, Bangladesh's GDP per capita is officially forecasted to reach $2,911, entirely surpassing India's $2,812. The NTV analysis points out that when this forecast dropped, it was like a lightning bolt hitting New Delhi's corridors of power. It's an internationally verified metric directly challenging a domestic political myth.
But you know what? The reality has actually outpaced those projections. $3,000. The source emphasizes that for the first time since their independence back in 1971, Bangladesh has crossed this monumental threshold, while India reportedly still remains in the 2,800s. The report argues that this singular number completely shatters that whole infiltrator myth, basically proving that the average Bangladeshi currently has more purchasing power than the average Indian.
Moving right along to Section 2, election strategy and propaganda, the politics of division.
So you might be wondering, why does this narrative even persist if the data contradicts it? Well, according to an analysis from the Business Standard, it wasn't a mistake at all. It was highly calculated. The source claims that political entities like the BJP actually weaponized this infiltrator label over a 10-year period to create a fabricated existential enemy. The ultimate goal here? Consolidating the Hindu vote bank through fear. And the report points out that, well, it worked. They cite the state of Assam as a prime example, where this fear-based narrative resulted in a massive electoral sweep. Which brings us to Section 3, the Kolkata EVM fire and allegations of electoral interference. Just wrap your head around this number. Over 400. That is the number of electronic voting machines, or EVMs, that were completely destroyed in a sudden, massive fire. And this didn't happen in some small rural outpost, okay? It happened at a 9-story government building in Alipur, South Kolkata, right in the immediate aftermath of some highly contested state elections. Following that election, opposition leader Mamata Banerjee made some very serious allegations of vote rigging. Now, the NTV News report theorizes that this fire was absolutely not a coincidence. By destroying those voting machines, the fire conveniently wiped out the possibility of any forensic audits or recounts. The source presents this as a deliberate, dark-of-night act to literally burn the evidence of democratic manipulation when standard political propaganda just wasn't cutting it anymore. Let's shift gears across the border for Section 4, economy under new leadership.
The shift in Bangladesh. Let's see how this all builds up, because this economic success, it definitely wasn't an overnight miracle. It actually happened right in the middle of massive political upheaval. It all started with the dramatic fall of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Next, Dr. Muhammad Yunus stepped in with an interim government, stepping up to perform what the source literally calls economic surgery. We're talking really tough, mastermind-level policies. Now, Tariq Rahman's BNP government is stepping in to take over for the coming months. But the massive, undeniable takeaway here is that directly on the heels of Yunus's interventions, Bangladesh officially hit that historic $3,000 milestone.
Next up, Section 5, the twin geopolitical challenges, navigating great powers. Drawing on some really sharp analysis from the Diplomat magazine, the report outlines a daunting two-step survival process for Bangladesh moving forward. Step 1, obviously, sustained economic recovery. But Step 2 is where it gets incredibly complex, mastering great power balancing. Bangladesh now has to perform this insanely delicate diplomatic tightrope walk between the US, China, and other major players. The main takeaway? Their entire future relies on making sure they don't become a pawn in someone else's strategic game. And that leads into our final segment, Section 6, Wealth Requires Military Security, the Harsh Geopolitical Reality. The source lays out a really harsh historical thesis here, basically stating that a wealthy economy is practically useless if you don't have the physical defense to protect it. As the report powerfully puts it, a rich but defenseless country just becomes a soft target for vultures and wolves circling on the geopolitical stage. Essentially, you can't be truly independent if your security infrastructure is weak, no matter how good your GDP is. Bringing this all full circle, the NTV analysis concludes that Indian policymakers are kind of trapped in a maze of their own making. Think about it. If they actually acknowledge the verified data of a rising, wealthy Bangladesh, they completely destroy the foundation of their own long-standing political strategy. The source argues their domestic electoral survival relies so heavily on that old infiltrator myth that they simply cannot afford to publicly admit the economic reality happening right next door. So what does this all mean for the future? We are literally watching a geopolitical thriller unfold in real time. Undeniable economic realities are violently clashing with deeply entrenched political narratives, and eventually, something has to give. Will the hard data finally force a massive change in regional diplomacy? Or will the political rhetoric just grow louder and louder to drown out the numbers? Which side of the border is going to blink first? That is the ultimate question you need to keep your eyes on. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning the narratives.